Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We are pleased to have you with us in this session on Pakistan's shared water resources, time for solutions. Water is definitely a hot topic in Pakistan these days. Most of the discussion surrounds infrastructure projects, but water is essential to life and it has repercussions and there are other facets that need to be discussed. And we'll discuss all of them here today, or we'll try and address all of them today. We'll be joined by Zartaj Gul, Minister of State for Climate Change. She's busy in a meeting, the cabinet meeting, and that's going on, so hopefully she'll join us at a later stage. But at this time, let me introduce the panelists, and as I do, I'll request them to come up on stage. Let me first start with Simi Kamal, who's the head of grants operations at Pakistan Poverty Alleviation Fund and the voluntary chair of the academic committee of the Hissar Foundation. Educated at University of Cambridge, she has 37 years of experience in water sectors, environment, climate change, food security, women's empowerment, gender equality, inclusive development, and poverty alleviation. Simi, may I please request you to come up? Thank you. Next, I'd like to invite Dr. Ghazala Mansuri, who is the lead economist in Poverty Reduction and Equity Group of the World Bank. Her research spans 4 broad areas: rural land, labor and credit markets, the economics of household behavior, and the political economy of participatory development and institutional and governance reforms for development. Thank you, Dr. Ghazala, for joining us. Next, I'd like to invite Dr. Zulfikar Ahmed, who is a professor and director of ORIC at the University of Wa. Previously, he served as chairman in the Department of Earth Sciences at Quaid-e-Azam University. He has a PhD in hydrogeology from University of Kentucky and has a postdoc from Stewart University, Australia. Dr. Saab, please join us. Thank you. We're glad to have with us Mr. Waqar Ahmed, who is the head of corporate affairs at Nestle, Pakistan. He's responsible for developing direct linkages, ensuring institutional networking for public policy and business advocacy with the government, media, private sector, and international institutions. Prior to joining Nestle, Mr. Waqar Ahmed worked as private sector specialist with the World Bank. Mr. Waqar, kindly, thank you. And last but not the least, Dr. Abid Suleri, who is the head of the Sustainable Development Policy Institute. He's a member of different policy-making forums and advisory boards, including Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council, National Advisory Committee of Planning Commission of Pakistan, among others. And I'm Dr. Imran Khalid. I head the Environment and Climate Change Department here at SDPI. So I'd like to start with Dr. Suleri, and being a food expert and a climate change expert, I'd like to take his view on how he thinks about water when it comes to food security and climate change, and start us off by giving us an overall picture of the water governance situation in Pakistan as well as the world. And then we'll move on to other panelists for more specific things. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Imran. I wasn't expecting it that I'll be starting, but well, we are talking of Pakistan's shared water resources and managing them. So while water resource, it's a shared commodity, and it's a God-gifted commodity, but it's not unlimited, and God hasn't given it to us to waste. And I think that is the most important thing that we need to keep in mind. When it comes to climate change is all about water and temperature. So either it's too high temperature or it's too low temperature, either it's too much water or it's too low water, or it's water which is unpredictable, rain which is not happening during rainy seasons or no rains at all. So it's all about unpredictability of weather when we talk of climate change, and of course temperature. Now agriculture is something which is dependent on predictable weather. So when we have crops for winter crops, summer crops, winter fruits, summer fruits, so basically we are talking about certain crops which can only be cultivated during a particular temperature and particular availability of water, and other crops which can only be cultivated when it's vice versa. Now what's happening with the climate change, and this is what we were discussing in the previous panel before lunch as well, that due to climate change, while it's affecting the agriculture production, it's also affecting other pillars of food security. Now, food security is not only about production. It's just one pillar, which is food availability. But food security is also about water, access to water, socioeconomic access. And that socioeconomic access, it gets impacted very badly due to climate change and due to lack of availability or too much availability of water due to floods or due to drought. And third important component of food security is utilization of food which is available. We just had delicious food at lunch. Now, after having this food, if you take a glass of contaminated water, the result would not be food security, the result would not be nutrition, the result would be food poisoning. So, all these three components one need to keep in mind when we are talking of food security, and water is a direct component and a direct factor in ensuring these three. I think in the second round we will also talk about how we can manage these water sources, but just to set the tone, I think we need to think of water not only in the context of drinking water or commercial water, but also water in the context of food security and agriculture, and water, too much water or too less water in the context of livelihoods and in the context of people's earning power.
Thank you, Dr. Suleri, for that introduction. Now I'd like to move to Mr. Waqar Ahmed and have him discuss, since he comes from Nestle, to talk about some of the water stewardship initiatives that Nestle has undertaken to address some of the challenges that corporations face. And so, Mr. Waqar Ahmed, over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Imran. Okay. So thank you very much for inviting for this session. I thought experts will talk first and then a chance will be given to me, and I can explain about the industry initiatives that we are taking. As Nestle is a large multinational with a large presence in Pakistan, we see this responsibility on us, not only for a reason that we into water business, but because we are a food company. And as a food company with a huge agri value chain, which means we use water starting from where we collect our milk and the farmer who actually grow fodder for feeding the animals, or the grains that we collect, or anything we do with the food has a impact on water. So it's very, very important for us that we not only look into our four walls that we conserve water when we are manufacturing, but we also go into the value chain and see how we can help the larger value chain where the farmer comes in, and we try to help them save water. And why it is important to go into the value chain? Because we all know when it comes to Pakistan, 90% of our water is used in agriculture. 10% is rest, which is used in areas like civic use and very small in industry and other usages also. Versus if we compare with the rest of the world, that is 70% is used only in agriculture, rest is 30% is used in other areas. So 90% is very, very important, and for a agri company is even more important that we work closely with the farmers and we try to save water wherever possible. Keeping that in mind, we thought it's a responsibility on us as a large player. So we start, of course, we have been in past very, very efficient inside our factories. And so we started inside our four walls, and we thought once we start, so we need to have some international certifications. How we can do that whatever we are doing, whatever we are claiming, it has to be certified and it should be measurable. So starting in-house, whatever we were doing, we reached out to Alliance for Water Stewardship. That's the international certification. And in that certification, WWF is there, and IUCN is there, WaterAid is there, and a lot of international NGOs are there they have developed a mechanism. It's a ladder-based approach where you achieve certain targets and then you get the certification. Of course, our Nestle Sheikhupura factory, which is the largest factory in Asia of Nestle, that was the first one to attain that, and the first factory in Pakistan also. As I'm talking to you, we have attained this certification in our small factory in Islamabad, and then by end of this year, hopefully by December, we'll get another certification in Kabirwala factory in Multan, which is the largest milk intake factory in the world, not only in Pakistan, in the world. And the plan is to get all four. The last one is in Port Qasim. So that's not enough, that's inside the wall. We were saving, but then we have to take certain certifications that we are doing that. Plus, and in doing that, what we are doing, we also taking initiative, the water that we use in our manufacturing process, it should not be a single use. So we are trying our best to multiple use that. So reusing the water within our premises have been very, very effective. So it's been used for the manufacturing process, then it's used for our, the water is used for the purpose of toilets, and then it goes for the gardening purpose also. And then it goes out to the system after cleaning through a proper mechanism. Probably we have one of the best class water treatment plants in Shekhupura factory, which takes out water which can be used. It is at a level which can be used easily for the agriculture. So that's the one part that we're doing within our premises. Then there are two plants that we are running. Is kind of at the moment they produce powders. So which means we evaporate when we use milk, and we all know milk naturally is 80% is water. So we evaporate water out of it. So we use that water also for that plant. So those plants are not using external sources for water. They are using the steam that coming out of that evaporation process. We use that in our processes also. So that's how we've been getting effective inside our four walls. Moving outside, I think is very important. What I think is important to work with communities also. That's the second part of our program. As Dr. Saab just said, Dr. Suleri mentioned that if we have a very nice food outside and then we have contaminated water, so that can it has totally different impact. So what we are trying to do, wherever we are operating, we are trying to provide clean drinking water facilities to the communities. So we have 6 water filtration plants at the moment in Kabirwala and in Shekhupura, reaching out to more than 60,000 people every day on WHO standard, which is at the arsenic level 10 ppm below. So that's what we are doing with the communities. Then we are reaching out to schools and teaching kids and children, why the importance of water and the importance of the hygiene part also. How if they use the dirty water, if their hands are not clean, how it can badly impact them. So this is the whole thing which we are running program for the communities, and every year we are touching upon 25,000 students minimum, and with at least 400 teachers trained on this program where they learn how to, when it comes on the wash part of it. So that's the second component. And then it comes the most important part, where we are working with multiple stakeholders. And of course, this whole approach that we adopted, we believe it's a collective approach. We can't do it alone. So it's where we are working with SDPI while talking to you, advocating what we are doing, but we also working with multiple other stakeholders. So once we go to our value chain, there we see very interesting phenomena. We are using drip irrigation methods with our farmers. So far we have done it more than 200 acres with our farmers, getting savings, and those savings are much bigger in terms of what we can achieve inside our factory. So for example, for just this 200 acres I've just mentioned with you, this is getting more than, it goes into millions of waters of saving that we can make, which we cannot make it inside our factories. And similarly, so that when we go for drip irrigation is a partnership with the government of Punjab. So it's a financing by World Bank, giving to, thank you to World Bank, which is going to Smart Agriculture Program of Government of Punjab, going into government funding, and then we are taking it to our farmers, and because they are providing 60%. Remaining 40% is providing by Nestle to its farmers, so that they can it can cover the 100% cost. And idea is to create lot more lighthouses in Punjab and the areas where we operate, so that others can adopt it. And because farmer will not adopt it until they clearly see an economic value out of it. So that's another program. Then on the technology side, we're working with LUMS. So we have just came up with the kind of sensors, and these sensors, the idea of sensor is they check the moisture level of the soil. So they can, and it's connected with a kind of an iCloud system. We send a message back to the machine of a farmer that when soil requires water. So automatically, and drip irrigation is all connected with that. So those kind of projects we are doing. Plus we have added more partners into it. So it's not only LUMS, SDPI, WWF is one of our key partners helping us doing all this AWS. But then Punjab government, which I just mentioned, then two very important partners where we are showcasing this thing for the larger community in Pakistan. One is US, University of Veterinary and Agriculture Sciences in Lahore, in Patoki, and just very close by to this place in with the Pakistan Agriculture Research Council, where the full farm system have been developed, drip irrigation, this water sense, and with solar mechanisms also. So that we try to save water comprehensively and showcasing it to the farmer who visit these facilities. So idea is to share, save water within our facilities, within our four walls, providing clean water facilities to our communities that live across us, and then saving water with our farmers. And that's what we're trying to do, and this requires a collective action. We can't do it alone. And this is the lesson for industry also. Industry cannot do it alone, and I'm sure NGOs can't do it alone, World Bank can't do it alone. We all need to work together. So civil society has a very important role to play. Researchers, academia, they have a very important role to play. So they need to, I think, do more research and probably tell us where we can improve. And same, I think, the request with the other think tanks and institutions like World Bank. So that's what we are trying to do in a very small way. It's an effort, it's a unique effort in the industry, but I think it will become it will create a lighthouse for Pakistan. That's all I have to say at this moment.
Okay, thank you, Waqar. I really appreciate your insight as far as this whole notion of multiplicity, if I may. So there are multiple uses of water, and that requires multiple partners in terms of resolving all these multiple problems that we are facing. And it requires an expertise in terms of multiplicity as well. And we have with us Dr. Zulfikar Ahmed, who's a hydrogeologist. And Dr. Saab, you've heard Dr. Suleri talk about the problems that we're facing vis-a-vis climate change, its repercussions for food security. You've heard Waqar Saab talk about the role of industry in terms of what Nestle is doing to come to terms with some of these problems. But as a technical person, as a hydrogeologist who's worked in the field, how do you see our water problems, particularly as they pertain to the groundwater resources they have, for example? Because in urban areas, we have water pumps that we're using, and we're deploying them continuously to extract water. I, for example, in my home, don't pay for the water pump that, or the electricity. I mean, nobody's asking me how much water I'm extracting. What kind of impact is my use of that water pump having on the water resources in Islamabad, for example, or my cousin's use in Lahore? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Imran, for inviting me in this panel discussions. Being a specialist in the field of hydrogeology and water resources, I will speak on declining water table in Rawalpindi in Islamabad and all over the Pakistan. It started about 2 decades ago when the population and the tube well installation are started to grow in numbers. Because of the population increasing and the water table declining because of the excessive pumping, developed some worse scenario. Likewise, you can see here the number of population which is increasing all over the Pakistan will need essentially clean water. For that, the WASA in Rawalpindi, RDA, Public Health Engineering Department and other associated departments are bound to produce water to the inhabitants of both the cities, twin cities like Islamabad and Rawalpindi. So the water well which were installed in Rawalpindi city, they increased in number and they started pumping it about 18 hours a day. There is very few resting time for this water well. Why they started increasing this Number of tube well, that was all politics because they won the election. They didn't see the aquifer capacity and the potential that exists in this Pothovar area, but instead they went for increasing more tube well to win popularity in their union councils and other areas. So it started to decline the water table. You can see there is a phenomena that water budget, if it is not met properly, then the water table will start to decline. At the end of the year, whatever we are taking out from the system refers to the aquifers, which are water bearing formations. We are bound to put back that water into the aquifer system annually by precipitations. But you can see the precipitations are also affected by the global warming and climate change. The precipitations months are shifting either backward or either forward due to the climate change. And also the glaciers melting are also taking place. We are getting about 70% water from the melting of the glaciers in the Himalayas mountains, which are about 5,212 number of glaciers that were actually counted by a American hydrogeologist Campbell in the past. And about 30% water comes from the precipitation over the Indus basins and in the other watershed area. Now we can see that direct recharge is not possible in the urban area because we have constructions, metals, roads, buildings. So very little chance there that the water will infiltrate to recharge the aquifer system. So recharge generally starts in the foothill of the mountains where we have cracks, where we have some fault lines. Like in Islamabad, we have a big long fault line which is called MBT, main boundary thrust faults, and it has cracks all over the fault lines. It is about 140 kilometers long, started from Kohat and goes all the way to Kashmir area. So if we have some source of injection of water along the fault line by a battery of dug wells or some sort of check dam, we are in a position to improve the water level. Currently we are working in collaboration with Nestle Pakistan to see the existing check dam and dug wells along Trail 5 and Trail 3 and Trail 6, which was initiated by CDA in the past. But that check dam were not in a proper form. They are very small check dams along the spring oozing out at the limestone fracture zones. That water flows and then stops for a certain time period in the check dam and then overflows, and the aquifers are being recharged. This is a sort of phenomena there. But past study which I actually did for Vasa 5 years ago, and numerical model was also run to see the phenomena happening in the Rawalpindi city. We concluded that over a 25 years period, now it is 5 to 6, 7 years left behind, we will be running out of water if this situation continues. In Pothovar area, we are having 4 to 5 aquifers. Like in Rawalpindi area, the thorough research and study and the drill data actually told us that there are about 5 aquifers. Out of 3 are out of water. Out of 3, the top aquifers are run out of water because of the continuous pumping. Now we are running the water or pumping the water at the last 2 aquifers here. So if we continue in the same fashion, these aquifers are going to be dried out soon. I will quote the example of Kohinoor textile mill, where they have about 25 wells, and they are pumping continuously because they need water to operate the mill, and they have a water table existing right now at a depth of 250 feet. So if you start moving from Rawalpindi city, you can see this declining or trough in the water table towards Kohinoor textile mill and towards the Hajj complex, then it tends to rise up. So different water level have been declined by this industry here and by excessive over pumping. The idea that I will suggest here to either construct a battery of dug well in the fault line area at the foothill of the mountains, Margala mountains, and inject water into that dug wells by storing water somewhere in the form of a reservoir during rainfall runoff, and then recharge the aquifer system. So most of the runoff comes from the foothill of the mountain. If I quote the example of Lai Nala, that begins from the foothill of the Margala mountains, it brings crystal clean water during rainfall. So as soon as it enters into the Rawalpindi city, it becomes contaminated due to the sewage water. So initially it is not contaminated, contamination begins because of the sewerage water into it, and it becomes heavily polluted. So this Nala also runs in the I-10-3 area and then all the way towards the southern part of the area. So right now, all over the Pakistan, we have to control the pumping and make it at par with the precipitation. As we know that the precipitation is not large enough to cope with the declining water table. So in this situation, we have to run out some artificial injection program. So the area where we call it a recharge zone, we can then construct some either check dam with this help of the CDA authority or with some other agencies, and either we can have some battery of dug wells, and then we can have some run of water stored over a period of time, and that can be injected back into the aquifer system. We can even completely evaluate the possibility that how many years would be required to bring back this declining water table to its original static level. The modeling technique, numerical contaminant transfer model or visual flow groundwater model, has a capability to compute with an accuracy of 70 to 75% that so many years will be required to refill this declining trend. This is just a technical view, and then we'll come back to it.
Okay, just a quick follow-up, Dr. Saab. As far as the capacity of the government departments, which agency is responsible when it comes to monitoring our groundwater? You talked about the sewage that's being disposed, and if it has industrial effluents in it, they're going to percolate down to the groundwater as well. Environmental Protection Agency comes to mind. Do you have an idea of any other agency which might be catering to these concerns?
I think mainly EPA is responsible for controlling all this contamination and declining water table. Other than that, I hold responsible for RDA and VASA, because they exactly know where the water table is now and why they are pumping 18 hours a day, because we should have pumped the well 8 hours to 10 hours a day, maximum 10 hours a day, and then we let the aquifer resting time so that the water table can recover and recoup to the original situation. So if you keep on pumping the well 18 hours a day, 19 hours a day, then all the aquifer, whether it is fully potentially enriched aquifer, they are going to deplete over a period of time. So all the government agencies, they already knew, like our Public Health Engineering Department, RDA, VASA and CDA, that the water table is declining. So if you compare the Islamabad aquifer with the Rawalpindi aquifer, Islamabad aquifers are more robust. There are about 300 water well pumping right now as compared to the Rawalpindi city, and they produce much more water with the highest pumping rate at NARC, Natural Agriculture Research Council, along the Korang rivers. So along the Korang rivers, the wells are pumping more than half cusic there. So remaining wells are giving us about 7,000 to 12,000 gallon per hour.
Okay, thank you very much for this insightful information when it comes to our groundwater, Dr. Saab. So now I'll move to Dr. Ghazala Mansuri and have her talk about. So we know water is essential to life. Water is important to life. Water is life. And we've been talking about how to protect water, but a recent report talks about water being a hazard, and Dr. Ghazala is the author of that, and I'd like to have her explain to us what she means by water as a hazard.
So thank you, Imran. I'll basically talk today about a report that I've just completed, and it's indeed called When Water Becomes a Hazard. And so the question is, when does water become a hazard? In many ways, but the thing I want to focus on is actually the relationship that we don't always see very directly between water and sanitation and child stunting. That's really what the report's main thrust is. Often, because we call child stunting malnutrition, we immediately think in terms of food deficits, right? Children are not getting enough food, food quality is poor, nutritive content is poor, poverty is what's causing stunting in Pakistan. That's where the mind tends to go, right? And what we are arguing here, based on a good bit of evidence, you should look at the report, it's a very evidence-thick report, right? Is that it's not that food isn't important, of course food is important, but that in a first order way, what's happening, and I'll give you the story in a very tight nutshell, the emphasis that we've had for the last 15 or 20 years on eliminating open defecation. We said we had very high levels of open defecation, which people, well, to increase household welfare, people should build toilets. Toilet building and expansion of access to water has all happened largely over the last 2 decades in household investments. Very little public investment of any type in either drinking water or in sanitation. As a result, very, very poor quality toilets have been built. Let me start with one type, which is this leach pit toilet, which is very common in southern Punjab and certainly all over Sindh. These toilets basically are designed to drain wastewater, fecal wastewater, right into the ground. And the idea is, if your water source is very far away from it, that might be okay. But people are digging hand pumps into extremely shallow aquifers. They go down to the first level, they find water, they stop, right? These shallow hand pump aquifers are basically causing the substrate contamination of water. So water coming directly out of hand pumps, directly actually out of, which is shocking, is already contaminated with the E. coli bacteria, right? The E. coli bacteria is what all of you know is a direct cause of diarrhea and many other problems in adults. I'm just talking about child stunting, but it also causes a great deal of adult morbidity, right? Which then means lost labor time, health costs, all of that, right? So so E. coli bacteria coming out of a hand pump is shocking, actually, for anyone, because when I first looked at the results of all the water tests we were doing, I was like, this is not possible, right? This should be a sealed, it should be an absolutely vacuum space. But the substrate water in Pakistan is contaminated. In Sindh, 1 in 2 of the pumps that we tested were already contaminated with E. coli. In Punjab, 1 in 3 pumps that were tested were already contaminated with water, with E. coli, right? So part of this is the substrate contamination that is going on into hand pumps. But doesn't stop there. The low quality toilets that we've built are also of another type, flush to open drain. Even what we are calling flush to sewer, and I really only got to know about all these toilet types as I started doing this work 2 years ago. I'm not, a person who's done work on sanitation before, and it just shocked me. So flush to open drain, what's going on? You literally use the toilet, and the post-toilet waste material is directly in an open drain right outside people's home. It's as though you had brought all of the fecal contamination from open defecation right into the neighborhood. People used to go off into the fields at least. Now it's in their gullies, right? So in the gullies there is open, untreated fecal matter. And there are 5, we say the 5 channels of oral fecal contamination, right? For babies or young children. It's food, it's flies, right? That open matter, flies are then sitting on that and then sitting on the child's food, okay? Sitting on the mother's hand, right? And so forth. So flies, fluids, food, all of these channels are now open, right? So all of the channels of fecal oral contamination are wide open. And this has happened because we've done so-called improvements in sanitation access, which have actually worsened fecal contamination near households. It doesn't stop there. That wastewater, and several people have mentioned this, there is virtually no treatment of wastewater in Pakistan, except for these small efforts that you're mentioning. Most wastewater just goes and sits in the whatever, the Ganda Nala or whatever near the village, and that wastewater often is also being drained into the surface irrigation systems, into canals and miners and so forth. And that wastewater is also being mixed with canal water and groundwater and then being used by farmers for crop production, right? Which means that a lot of the vegetable, and we don't do any testing of food, right? So we don't test the vegetables coming from rural Sindh into Karachi city or coming from nearby areas right into Lahore city. Why am I mentioning the cities? I'll come to that in a minute. But basically when you're using wastewater for crop production untreated, almost all of the food that everybody is consuming raw is going to have likely E. coli contamination. I can't show you the figures, but it's in the report, and I want to point out one stunning fact as a result of this. Diarrhea rates in Karachi and Lahore and cities like this are not at all responsive to income. So you can't protect yourself by being rich, right? Your food supply is already contaminated. So all of us are walking around with persistent diarrhea most of the time, but also with what is called subclinical levels of contamination and illness. In babies, that is, we are calling that environmental enteropathy. What's happening is our intestines have these things called villi. They're sort of these hair-like structures. They're all over your intestine, and they are the things that absorb the nutrients and push them into the bloodstream, right? When there is fecal matter present in a baby's intestine, right, that villi gets damaged. Okay? Once the villi is damaged, you can feed them whatever you want, which is why I say it's not that food is not important, but you cannot say that when you give them better food, more nutrient-dense food, that things will improve, because their intestines cannot absorb the nutrients because of the incredible weight of total fecal contamination or fecal burden in the environment, right? So I think this is sort of thing when you start thinking about it, it's distressing on many levels, right? But also what I want people to understand is this is not the problem, this is not someone's problem, right? It doesn't really matter how wealthy you are, right? At some level. It matters to a degree. The extent to which diarrhea translates into stunting is modified, because some of the other channels are missing. People are washing their hands, you know, they have sanitary bathrooms, whatever, but the food channel is still open, right? And when you're eating in public spaces and outside, it's completely open, right? So I think that what's the upshot, right, of all of this? Basically, we've gone about with doing no investments in sanitation, and as a result of that, we have opened a massive space for water to become a hazard for our health, right? So this whole analogy you began with, eat a nice meal, right, and then drink contaminated water. So my point is, yes, end open defecation, and then say what have you accomplished, right? Basically, your hands have fecal contamination, okay? So open defecation has not solved any problem, right, in Pakistan. So the upshot of all of this is that we need very, very, very urgent attention to these issues, because in this case, we can't wait a decade or two, you know, for us to get the pipe to sewer systems, and we cannot wait for a decade or two to get, you know, clean drinking water, safe drinking water to everyone. I think it'll take time. We are making great efforts. These small efforts are wonderful, right? But it's going to take a while to get to sort of, you know, WHO quality for everybody, right? Delivered in a safe way into the home. So until then, the report concludes by saying we need to take extremely urgent action as far as little children are concerned, and there's really no simpler way than basically point of use chlorination of water, right? We have to do massive information campaigns, tell people what the costs and dangers of this thing are, inform them about basic health behaviors and the fact that we need to do point of use chlorination, so that the next 5 to 7 years we don't have another few generations of children born that are going to have extremely compromised. And you know, I'm not so worried about the sort of, people think of stunting and they think height. That's not the biggest problem by a far shot. The biggest problem is that your immune system is compromised. You know, the entire immune system is in your gut, right? If your gut is compromised, your immune system is gone, which means that you start developing cognitive deficits in the brain, right? So don't think that what's being affected is somebody's height, right? That's actually, that sort of, you know, it doesn't worry me, right? It's not that, it may be a problem, but that's, when we say stunting, what's really happening is that when we say that stunting affects the child's cognitive development, it does this, that, it's because the immune system is gone, right? So we need to do point of use chlorination. That's for the water. There are many bigger issues, and you know, as big issues with water, the chemical effluents and all of these issues that are also causing problems, and we should also think about that. We need to have some regulation around the use of untreated waste for crop production at least, right? Because there should be, and people have to be informed that this is not fertilizer, untreated, right? You have to make it safe for crop production. But certainly this recycling, you know, is wonderful. Sort of figuring out, and what I think that research institutes here and efforts like yours can do is figure out what are the cheapest ways that communities can treat their basic levels of treatment of water, get it up to the point where it is safe for reuse in crop production at least, or at least will not cause further recontamination, right? And we need regulations around the proximity of hand pumps and toilets and these types of toilets we are building, right? So I think this is very, very urgent. And the third thing I would say is, on that front, I would say we need to involve communities and close the drains. There are cheap ways to not have open drains running through every gully in every neighborhood, right? So that we can at least not have open fecal matter. The third thing we need to do is that our fiscal transfer system is completely broken, right? So what a district gets by way of fiscal allocations overall, as well as for water and sanitation, is determined by what it got in the past. It's completely legacy driven. There is absolutely no attention to actual outcomes, health outcomes and other deficits that communities have in determining how much transfer they need. So you need to direct fiscal resources to places where there is greatest need so they can do what is needed, right? So this is something that I think, and there are many other recommendations in the report, I won't go into those. Let's just think of the very immediate, the very short run, the low cost, relatively low hanging fruit that we have to do right now, right? And so I'm going to stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. For such a comprehensive overview of the water issues, particularly as they pertain to sanitation and how they're affecting our health and that of our children. And so finally now we come to Simi, who's got the unenviable task of bringing this discussion together. So we've talked about groundwater, we've talked about industry, we've talked about water and health. We know that nearly 90% of our water goes towards agriculture. And so, Simi, I'd like you to sum this up in light of your experience and in light of some of the policies that we're coming up with. So we've got a national water policy now. The Supreme Court just had a discussion on water and they came out with a statement as well. How do you see this in that light? Thank you.
Thank you. I'm really happy to be here and good to see a full room. So I think at least the campaigns which have been fueled by the demands of the Supreme Court are working. I think people are looking at those. Okay, I'd like to begin by just mentioning something which perhaps some of us may not be that familiar with. You know, in Europe for several centuries, in the medieval ages and just after the medieval ages, they just did not drink water. Okay, for us it's really surprising. And you know, when we look at all the spirits that they imbibe, we say, oh God, these are bad people, and there they are taking alcohol, और वो बच्चों को भी पिलाते हैं और उनको पिला के सुला देते हैं और सारे वक्त पीते रहते हैं. What is this? It's because they couldn't drink the water because all the rivers and all the water sources were so terribly contaminated with precisely the kind of pathogens that Ghazala has just been talking about. And there were some of those that we humans have managed to get rid of. You know, the inoculation that the children get, and plague, and so many other waterborne diseases, the different kinds of diarrheas and typhoid. We have controlled some of them. So when we say what is humankind's biggest battle, a lot of people who are biologists and in the medical subjects and working there in those disciplines say, well, it is mankind's battle against parasites and against viruses. And against viruses, we haven't won yet. We haven't controlled them as yet. So there we were. So the public services for clean water and sanitation originated in those parts of the world where people couldn't drink water for centuries and decades. And so if you think about the terms that were used for those early public services, water closet and different kinds of water closets, the kadamcha that was used in our part of the world. And that's all very recent in human history. And I think because the population is growing so fast, we have barely managed to deal with one technology, then more come along, and many more are coming along, and we really need those. So for every action, there is a reaction, and every development has a cost, as someone just said here earlier on. And we are always striving for that fine balance, and that is what is so hard for us to achieve in the water sector in Pakistan. That balance between use and conservation is always a battle. Organizations like Nestle, we just heard about all the good practices that they are doing and using, the term of what stewardship means and all of that on the one hand. And then we also, we also deride the corporate sector because there are so many other practices that have to be, looked at correctly. Then balance between supply and demand, we haven't managed to get even close to that in Pakistan. Then between rights and pricing, what should we pay for? What is our right? And then, between a kind of balance between new infrastructure that many of us continue to call for and the old infrastructure that we seem to be discarding instead of keeping in repair and maintenance. Why is it that we now have a 50 million acre-feet groundwater in Punjab? Because we don't keep our canals in repair, so there is a lot of seepage. And then, when we want to divide water amongst the different provinces, then we only want to divide surface water. We don't want to look at that. And then when some of us say, okay, we need to add up what everybody has, so Punjab has groundwater and surface water, Sindh has mostly surface water and a little bit of groundwater, Balochistan has nothing, almost nothing, and KP has both groundwater and surface water. So what is fair? These are issues that we haven't even begun to address as yet. So we have heard earlier, talk about water and food nexus from several of our speakers, and I would like to add, the environment. One or two people spoke of that as well. Dr. Suleri spoke of that. So when we look at the water, food, environment nexus, it is becoming harder and harder for us to talk of one sector without talking of the other. We had heard several echoes of that in the last hour. But then we look at the users of water, people who are the right bearers and the responsibility holders. Who are they? Who are these people? The world, in our part of the world in any case, is getting younger every day. We had the Me generation, then we had the Me Too movement, and then we have the I Want It Now generation. And I want to tell you something that really shook me up, because we are now in our late 50s and 60s, and maybe we don't think like the rest of the world is thinking. So I was speaking at the Stockholm Water Week, and I was a keynote speaker on urban water. So I was, and there were a lot of other people in the panel. There was the mayor of Paris and the person who looks after New York's water and sanitation system, several others. So there was a discussion on how it is in South Asia and in some Southeast Asian countries as well, and also other parts of the world, Africa as well, that we have a system designed for 24-hour water delivery, and you get like 1 or 2 hours of water, if at all, and then you need an underground tank, and then you need an overground tank, and then you need the energy, and the water is in there. Then we put in pumps, which are certainly illegal in Pakistan. So we were talking about how we have to do this, and everybody was talking about the tanker mafias in many cities. So this young girl stood up, she was from Bangalore, and she said, what's wrong with tankers? Okay, what's wrong with it? So I said, okay, come in the front, let's hear your viewpoint. She said, it's so easy. When we want water, we just pick up the phone and we order water. So what's wrong with that? So and I thought, okay, I'm looking at my own city, Karachi, where people who don't have supplies of water, what do? A child picks up the phone and calls up another child who is a child vendor of water, and the children between them do the transaction and the water is delivered. This is happening in our Kachi Abadis which don't have. So maybe we are behind times, and we are still thinking about a very large, very difficult to maintain, hard to govern system in cities which doesn't seem to be delivering, and the people who are going to populate these areas are not thinking like us, and they have a very, very different view. So this young girl said, I said, well, tankers break the road. She said, we'll fix the roads. We said, we order everything else. Why can't we order water? So it's really set me thinking. So I'm putting it in front of you. Maybe we're just totally out of touch and out of tune with what young people are doing. And if you look at what the World Economic Forum has been talking about, they're talking about the fourth industrial revolution, which is the data revolution. I recently visited the Alan Turing Center in London. There are entire, Google is coming up with a whole Google Water. People in Australia have already prepared water cubes. These are data analytics and data management systems which work at the speed of light almost. And we haven't used them as yet. Then disruptive technologies, we don't talk much about, but this is already happening. Okay, the nanotechnologies are all over the place. Just a few days ago, I saw a toilet. Let's talk of sanitation, Ghazala, which the Gates Foundation is promoting all over the world, and you know it works on nanofilters. So the toilet uses its own water again and again and again, and it also manages solid waste. And in the end, you get sludge which you can use in the field. And you know, after using the same water 15, 16, 17 times, you want to aerate, you take it out, you use it for crops or whatever, maybe not fit for drinking, but fit for a lot of other things. And this technology is becoming really cheap. So in the future, we are not going to need 24-hour water delivery. There'll be different ways we build homes. And the tiny home movement, which is now all over the world, which is saying we've got to conserve all our resources and we have to conserve earth. And conserving water is part of conserving earth. So it's 2 up and 2 down. It's pre-manufactured. You have a heat source which you take out, you know, you get heat or whatever from it. You have solar roofs, and you use these kinds of, you know, recycling within the house, and that's very, very sustainable. That's where the world is moving, and we need to keep up with that. Then let's talk of demographic dividends in Pakistan. We have a youth bulge. Where are they all going to go? We have to have new kinds of water-related work for them to do. We heard today, you know, the issues with agriculture, with food production, that we have to increase much more. We heard about sanitation. We have to go defecation-free areas. We want to have responsible industries, all of those. So how are we going to absorb this demographic dividend? Because if we don't take care of it, then all these other things that we are doing, if we are not able to absorb them into the stream of the water, food, energy nexus in Pakistan, this is going to be really, if I may pun it, the disruptive element of technology which is coming up. So what do? Dr. David Gray, who is now the world's leading authority on water in Pakistan, and he was very close to Dr. John Briscoe. We all know Dr. John Briscoe and what a friend of Pakistan he was. He is of the opinion, and he agrees with you entirely, Ghazala. He says that if we want to develop the girls of Pakistan, we have to improve sanitation. Because when they do not have sanitation support, they don't go to school, they don't go to colleges, they can't travel, they can't take on jobs. I know so many girls who studied geology, but they cannot go into the field because nobody ever thinks about providing sanitation support for them. So yes, that's really important. And what do we do in Naya Pakistan? Okay, we have a president who says that water is one of his 3 priorities. We have a new brash young man as Minister for Water. We have this Islamabad declaration. We have a very proactive Supreme Court and High Court, and some of the work that they're doing came about as a result of a lawyer called Shahab Usto in Sindh, who filed a petition about pollution and about unsafe drinking water in Sindh. And he was kind of shunted from door to door for 7 or 8 years before he was heard. And now people in Punjab are telling him, come and do a similar thing for us in Punjab. So, you know, the courts got involved. And to me, this is a very rare instance where the Supreme Court of a country has gotten involved in water of the country. There have been some instances. In fact, the whole concept of water stewardship that the industry has adopted, that WWF is following, and that we talk about now, actually came from Lake Biwa. I don't know how many of you know that, in Japan, which had gone red. You know, it had atrophied and gone red because of all the sewage that was going in there, being put there and treated by the industry. And then children started getting nappy rash. So the mothers of those children started a movement, and they went to court, and they fought a battle for 10 years, until the court said that it was the responsibility of those industries to pay up, to clean up the lake. And then the lake is now a pristine lake. It is a cultural kind of heart of Japan. And that set up a whole series of litigations across the world in terms of cleaning water. So it's the term water stewardship actually comes from Japan and comes from this particular experience. So when we are talking about water stewardship, how can we, as stewards of water in our own different spheres, what are some of the things that we can and should be doing? I'd like to just put in perspective for you in the next few minutes of what is the scenario in Pakistan right now. we finally have a water policy, a national water policy. But the national water policy has got everything and everyone's grandmother in it, so it's not a policy really. But there have been instances by citizens of Pakistan. There's a think tank on the rational use of water, which in 2016 brought out a well thought out water policy, or what should be the water policy of Pakistan. There are other people working on ideas. And then we have drinking water and sanitation policies in the provinces. But we don't have great guidance at the district level. And when a little earlier, we were talking about the legacy of financing, which means that whatever you have, you just keep on shouting for more, and you don't think about the changed circumstances. In some cases, those people could ask for much more, but we are stuck in the past, and that is there in many instances. And of course, this legacy also reflects the patriarchal feudal structures that are reflected in our assemblies. So it is very hard to get the kind of legislations there that would make water sharing better, or which would help move the water debate into pricing. So if industry is using water, what is it paying for? Okay, what should it be paying for? Is wastage of water right? No, it's not. So where do we cut off? What is the water right? And where beyond that should we be paying for? We say it can't be done in Pakistan. Well, it has been done for ages. If you look at the Myanmar town between Karachi and Hyderabad, that has had water meters for the last 20 years. And it's very interesting, their tariff system. Nobody pays anything for a little bit. On top, you pay a bit more, but beyond a certain amount, you pay steeply more, with the result that people don't waste water, and water is being utilized. So we have models within Pakistan that we can look at. So what else is there in this Naya Pakistan? At least there's a media campaign. Ghazala and I were discussing a little earlier that maybe it's not very appropriate. Maybe that time could be used for better messaging, because it's only talking about dams. But nonetheless, what has happened is that suddenly water is at the forefront of people's minds. And for us, I think it's a great step forward, regardless of what aspects of water they are talking about, because some of us have been at it for 20 years, trying to get people to talk about water. So at least now that is happening. So now we can go the next step. We can say, okay, what part has to be part of awareness raising? What is more important? What are the real issues? At least, although a lot of the talk shows are just screaming and shouting, and there's a lot of misinformation, yet I say it's a good thing that's happened, and it's now up to us to ensure that that water dialogue and discussion becomes more rational. So now, what are some other things happening here in Pakistan? In the universities across Pakistan, there are many that are working on water. You mentioned LUMS a little while ago. We have a water technology center there. There are about 7 or 8 other universities that have come together in a Universities for Water network. So we are trying to share, we are trying to change the courses, change the discourse, change the conversation around water. There is the Panjwani Hissar Water Institute coming up at NED University, which is going to be a cutting-edge 21st century institute on water, which is going to be looking at all these problems that I spoke of a little while ago. And last but not least, in the Islamabad Declaration, which came out about 6 weeks ago, it's interesting to see that some very important things have been placed there. So while we are saying that it is imperative for Pakistan to invest in supply augmentation, reservoirs, etc., we are also talking about ensuring better utilization of groundwater, adopting appropriate water technologies, whether it be recycling, desalination, water harvesting, managing consumption and use of water, which means controlling water demand and pricing. Not just talking about supply side, but how to change demand. People should say, we don't want to waste water like that. People should say, oh, give us only this much. Or people should be able to stop other people when they are wasting water, and we need to have rules and laws around that. So government is now talking about introducing water accounting based on modernized water data collection methods, looking at water availability per capita, building trust amongst provinces regarding water division. We are talking salinity and sedimentation. Now these are two things we never talk of. Many of you probably have never heard this discussed in a session. But the Indus Basin, which is our lifeline, and we depend, as we heard, 90 or to 95% of our water is used in agriculture. It is going saline. Okay, and the sedimentation that is being caused in the dams and in all the other reservoirs is not being removed. So these are twin problems that we have to address. And around salinity is also waterlogging. We don't have institutions to deal with that. There isn't enough research going on in our universities. There isn't enough person power to handle this. So this is something we really have to focus on. And we need to look for a lot of innovative solutions, especially for our plain areas, for our delta areas, for our coastlines. They are not part of the discourse on water as yet, or not as much part of the discourse as they should be. We can harvest water from the atmosphere. People do it all over the world. You know, when we say what is there in Balochistan, I say there's lots. There are temperature differences. If you just put metal trays, if you put, you know, even like billboards out there, just the temperature differences will mean condensation from which we can get water out of the atmosphere. If you already have an air conditioner, you're using it, it's condensing water when the cooling action happens. It is falling on concrete and going back into the atmosphere. We can harvest and catch all of that. These are not expensive methods, but it's just that there needs to be enough of a campaign-like move to do this so people feel that they can join in there. Then, you know, the various traditional and non-traditional financing methods. Why aren't we, as a country, raising water bonds? Why aren't our banks investing in water infrastructure? That is something for which, you know, some of us have been in dialogue for like 10 years. Habib Bank recently financed Dasu Dam. And now there is discussion to say that they could come up and support others. And we need to do flood risk reduction. A lot of that has to happen because in the climate change scenario, floods and droughts are now part of our daily lives in a way, and we have to learn to deal with them. And you know, it is no longer feasible to allow an unfettered access to valuable resources of water with no incentive to check usage. You were talking about what's happening in your area. In terms, you said nobody ever asks you when you take out water from the aquifer. We have heard from Mr. Waqar Ahmed as well about all the different ways that we are extracting water from our aquifers and not replacing that water. So there are a number of things that we can do. So we know all the problems. We don't need to reiterate. I think we need to move to solutions, and maybe others would like to add. What are some of the things that we need to do now in the short term, in the medium term? Ghazala, you were talking to me about desalination for all our local areas.
But maybe.
Please go ahead.
No, I think that one of the key things you've raised, Simi, and I think that we assume that it's going to be just too difficult to do, is water pricing across the board. The reason that agriculture consumes so much water is that water is used fairly ruthlessly in irrigation for those who have it, right? It's a free resource. There's no reason to conserve, either by diversifying out of crops that are water thirsty and which we perhaps should not be growing so much of, or by using things like drip irrigation. Why do farmers have such a hard time with it? If something is free, why would you put in a costly system to conserve water, right? So we can market all this stuff and we can try to do pilots, but we need to price the water. We need to price groundwater, right? And I think it's very much time to move to serious water pricing. That's one thing that's been on my mind, and I think it will affect many other things. Control. The other thing is the completely unregulated dumping of industrial effluents. We are really doing way too little on it. They're probably another huge source of health impacts for everyone. You know, so I think just there are so many issues you raise, Simi, and they're all so important. But I think if we can focus on things that we can do, we can price water, we can restrict industry, right? We should be having a very serious conversation on this. And then of course we should move towards modern and technologies. That change will occur. But I think that in the next, if I look at the next decade, right, we will not have individuals will not have the budget to buy yet the Gates toilet or things like it. We will have to either subsidize it, incentivize it, right? But we should be thinking about these things for sure, right? I'll let other people come in, but I think the issue of water pricing really should become.
I think. It's finally working. I think Dr. Ghazala, what you mentioned about this E. coli thing, I think it's so rampant, and because we are running these water filtration plants closer to our factories and heart of the cities also. So we actually went into trouble with one of our water filtration plant in Sheikhupura, where we actually, went into this trouble. And it's a water filter which just goes down like few hundred feet. And we were really surprised the way the waste is going inside and is destroying. And it's a fairly expensive treatment that you have to provide. So I think that's a very important thing to do, how we are managing our waste. Whether that's a civic waste, whether it's industrial waste, or any kind of waste which is going into the soil, we need to manage that. Because it has such a... So, yeah, so I think...
Yeah, maybe come sit here.
So I think, as I was just mentioning, so I think this is a very important factor, how we manage our waste. And I think this is a very collective responsibility, and and it should be, it cannot be probably, if we only leave it on the government to enforce it, I think it should not come like that. It should be more responsibility come to all stakeholders, and they have to take this responsibility, because this is what we are leaving for our future generations. And if we don't do it right now, it will be late, and then I think it's very difficult to manage. So that's, I think, on the one side which you mentioned, I think is very important. Another kind of contribution that we are doing, we're doing a very interesting project with BISP, and where we are kind of converting those BISP beneficiary into a rural sales agents, and we're converting around 500 females into rural sales agent in areas of Punjab. So of course that's hugely impacting their livelihood. So they are moving from receiving end of a grant of a quarterly way to earning 6,000 to 7,000 rupees monthly. But I think that's one part of it. The important part of it is, again, the challenge that I think a lot of females are facing is on the hygiene part, and the families and the young children are facing. And is again, the open defecation is such an important part there. So what we try to build there is running a nutrition program with those females. For sales training, we can give it to very few, but then we are getting together all these female at one place, and then giving the very basic information on nutrition. And it starts from washing hands, and from the impact on life if the hygiene is not taken care of. And that's a big problem in the rural areas. I think somehow, I don't know who, probably companies can't do much, but I think it's a responsibility of a state, civil society, at least to raise awareness that we need to answer these questions. And that's, I think, is a hygiene part is very, very important. As you very rightly said, I think the height that we see as a impact of malnutrition is probably visibly there, so we can see that. But what is happening inside because of this bad contaminated water, we are not able to see that. So that's where we need to focus.
Thank you, Waqar Saab, and all the other panelists. So we were going to launch this policy brief that we've been working on. It's called Water and the Private Sector, Accelerating Sustainable Corporate Water Stewardship and Collective Action in Pakistan. We'll do it at the end of the session, but I just thought that I would just go over some of the recommendations that we've had, and they kind of relate to the discussion that we've just been having. And so there are about five or six of them. And so the first one is that the corporate sector entities already involved in implementing water stewardship initiatives can play an integral role in enhancing the capacity of other businesses. So that means if Nestle has started a water stewardship program and it's taken lead on that, then it can help other corporate agencies in that regard. And this can be done through the formation of a water network. You talked about a water network for the universities. Here we're talking about a water network for the businesses, as well as governmental, non-governmental, and academia. Information dissemination is the key to advocacy. Corporate sector entities should ensure that data in terms of water withdrawals for operations and supply chain is made public on a regular basis. This is going to build credibility for them, and moreover, it will enhance trust and confidence in their activities. No water stewardship initiative can be completed without the involvement of local communities. They should be made an integral part of any initiative in this regard. The next is that the concept of water stewardship should be integrated into national, regional, local water policies as well as plans, and mainstreamed into sustainable and efficient water resource management across sectors. And finally, collaborative research initiatives need to be undertaken so as to bridge the information gaps, particularly as they pertain to risks due to climate change. So I just thought I'd quickly go over some of the recommendations that come as a result of this, and I'll be sharing this with anyone who's interested as well as the panelists. Okay, thank you very much, Simi, and thank you very much to all the panelists for their deep and wonderful insights into this very important topic. We've come to the end of our session. I know there's some of you have more questions, but hopefully we can take them up over tea. But we're going to try and launch our policy brief here. So water problems, we've been talking about water problems, and they need to be discussed in the context of security. Now, and a lot of people are doing that. Security used to be centered around borders and war machines and armies, but now what's happening is that they're talking about non-traditional threats, non-traditional security threats, and water is a non-traditional security threat. Climate change is a non-traditional security threat. And in fact, some people might even call them threat multipliers. So I'm kind of giving this introduction because we've got a special guest with us, Professor Feroz Hassan Khan, who's a research professor in the Department of National Security Affairs at the Naval Postgraduate School, Monterey, California, and he's been there since 2003. Professor Khan, we're really pleased that you're here, and hopefully we can have you present our policy briefs to the panelists. So if you could kindly come to the stage, and we'd appreciate it. Thank you. So may I please request Professor Khan to present our policy brief to Dr. Zulfikar. Dr. Saab, aage aajiye. Simi, please. Thank you. To Waqar Saab. And finally, Dr. Ghazala. Thank you very much. Thank you, Professor Khan, for taking the time to be here with us, and appreciate your presence. Thank you. And thank you to all the audience and the panelists. It's been wonderful.